Maria Thompson felt her heart hammering as she walked down the long, polished hallway of the courthouse. The echo of her footsteps seemed unusually loud, almost as if the building itself was aware of the tension building inside her. Today was a very important day, not only for her, but for the small community center she had worked tirelessly to protect. For years, that center had been a safe place for children after school, for elderly neighbors to gather, and for anyone in the town who needed a friendly hand or a listening ear. Now, a zoning dispute threatened to shut it down, and Maria had spent countless nights preparing her case. She had meticulously gathered documents, interviewed witnesses, and even created a simple, heartfelt presentation to show how much the center meant to the community. And yet, despite all her preparation, a knot of worry twisted in her stomach. She had faced difficult people before, but nothing like Judge Richard Preston, who was notorious in the county for his sharp tongue and impatience. Maria had heard stories of how he often humiliated lawyers in court, sometimes making them doubt their own abilities in front of everyone. The thought made her palms sweat, but she refused to back down. She reminded herself that she had fought harder than anyone else to reach this point, and she would not allow fear to steal her confidence. Buddy, her golden retriever, waited faithfully outside. He was more than just a pet, he had been her companion through long nights of work, sitting quietly beside her as she read through case files, sometimes nudging her hand with his soft nose when he sensed she was tired. Buddy had a way of calming her that nothing else could. Maria allowed herself a small smile as she imagined his warm, reassuring eyes. She had trained him to stay calm around strangers, but she always wondered how he would react if he were allowed inside a place like this. As she entered the courtroom, the room seemed even larger than she remembered. The high ceiling, the rows of polished wooden benches, and the serious faces of the spectators made her pulse quicken. Judge Preston sat at the bench, looking over the courtroom with an expression that combined boredom and quiet superiority. He was an older man, with sharp features and a stern voice that carried effortlessly through the room. His eyes landed on Maria immediately, and she felt as if a spotlight had been turned on her. She straightened her back and tried to suppress the tiny shiver that ran down her spine. The audience murmured quietly, a mix of curious townspeople, reporters, and a few familiar faces from the community center. Maria recognized some children who had grown up attending her programs, now sitting quietly in their seats, eyes wide with a mix of excitement and nervousness. Her chest swelled with pride, but also a deep sense of responsibility. She could not let them down. Judge Preston cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention to the front of the room. "Miss Thompson," he said, his voice calm but carrying a sharp edge, "I trust you are prepared to present your arguments. Let us hope you understand the seriousness of this case." There was a subtle sneer in his tone, though he tried to mask it with formality. Maria swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his gaze. She knew he intended to make her stumble, to make her feel small in front of everyone. But she also knew that giving in to fear would not help the children, the families, or the neighbors who relied on the center. She took a slow, steadying breath and reminded herself of all the work she had done, of the evidence she had collected, and of the countless hours she had spent making sure every detail was correct. Her mind focused on the facts, not on the judge. She began to walk toward the front of the room, keeping her head high, her steps measured and deliberate. Every inch of the polished floor seemed to shine under the soft light, reflecting back a woman who was determined not to be intimidated. As she moved closer to the bench, Judge Preston's eyes narrowed slightly. "Be quick," he said, "we have a schedule to keep, and I do not intend to waste time with weak arguments." Maria's throat felt dry, but she pushed forward, setting her case files neatly on the desk in front of her. The papers were a lifeline, something tangible she could rely on when words seemed too fragile. She opened her notebook and glanced at her notes, her fingers brushing against the worn pages that held years of preparation. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath as she lifted her gaze and began to speak. Her voice was steady, carrying just enough strength to fill the room without shouting. She explained the importance of the community center, describing how it provided a safe environment for children after school, how it hosted programs for seniors who would otherwise feel isolated, and how it offered a place for neighbors to come together in times of need. She spoke about real people with real stories, hoping the judge and everyone present would see beyond the cold letters of the zoning law. As she spoke, Maria noticed a few heads nodding in agreement, some of the children leaning forward with wide eyes, captivated by the passion in her voice. It was in that moment that she remembered Buddy, waiting faithfully outside. She imagined him sitting quietly, eyes fixed on the courthouse door, sensing her nervousness and wishing he could be there to support her. The thought gave her a quiet surge of confidence. She realized that even if the judge tried to belittle her, she was not alone. She had the truth on her side, she had the support of the community, and she had the silent strength of a loyal friend who had never let her down. Judge Preston shifted in his seat, his expression darkening slightly as he leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly. "Your arguments are heartfelt," he said slowly, as if savoring the next words, "but do you really understand the legal framework behind this case? Or are you simply appealing to emotions?" His tone was cutting, designed to make her second-guess herself. Maria felt a flicker of doubt, a tiny shadow of uncertainty, but she pushed it aside immediately. She straightened her shoulders and met his gaze with calm determination. "Your Honor," she replied, "I understand the law, and I have prepared thoroughly. But the law does not exist in a vacuum. It is meant to serve the people, and in this case, it is important to consider the real impact on the community. This center is not just a building, it is a lifeline for many." A hush fell over the courtroom. Maria could feel the tension, the collective curiosity of the audience, the unspoken anticipation. She knew this was only the beginning of a long day, but for the first time, she felt a sense of control. She had taken the first step, standing firm in the face of authority, and it felt empowering. Her thoughts briefly returned to Buddy, imagining him wagging his tail, a small smile forming on her face. She knew that whatever happened, she had already proven something important not just to the judge or the jury, but to herself. She had proven that courage was not about the absence of fear, but about standing firm despite it. And with that quiet confidence, Maria prepared herself for the challenges ahead, ready to face whatever Judge Preston might throw at her, knowing that the day was far from over, but the first battle had already been won. The courtroom had grown silent after Maria's opening statement, a tense quiet that seemed almost alive, as if everyone present was holding their breath to see what Judge Preston would do next. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers, his eyes narrowing as he studied her with a mixture of skepticism and impatience. "Miss Thompson," he said slowly, his voice carrying just enough sharpness to make the room flinch, "while your story about the community center is touching, we are here to discuss legalities, not sentimental tales. Can you explain why the law should bend simply because of the emotions of a few townspeople?" His words were precise, meant to unsettle her, and Maria felt a familiar tremor of anxiety. She had expected this, though, and forced herself to take a steadying breath. She glanced down at her notes, letting her fingers linger on the familiar pages that had guided her through countless preparations. This was not the time to falter. "Your Honor," she replied, her voice steady despite the pressure, "I understand the importance of the law and the legal framework. My argument is not to bypass the law, but to ensure that the law is applied fairly and with understanding of its impact. The community center serves hundreds of people who rely on it for support, education, and safety. I am asking the court to consider these real consequences in its judgment." Judge Preston leaned forward, tapping his gavel lightly, as if to remind her that he could dismiss her at any moment. "Real consequences, Miss Thompson," he said, his tone heavy with condescension. "Are you suggesting that the law should be ignored whenever someone feels inconvenienced? This is the law, not a charity case. I hope you understand the difference." His words were deliberate, designed to make her question herself, and for a moment, Maria felt the familiar prickling of doubt. But she pushed it aside, focusing instead on the countless interviews she had conducted with families, the photographs she had taken of children playing safely, the testimonials from seniors who would otherwise be lonely. Each fact, each story, reminded her why she was standing there, and she squared her shoulders, refusing to shrink under the judge's glare. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "I am not asking for the law to be ignored. I am asking for it to be interpreted with fairness, taking into account the real-life impact of this decision. The community center is a place of learning, support, and safety. Closing it would affect more than just a building, it would affect people's lives, their education, and their sense of community." The courtroom shifted subtly, a ripple of murmurs passing through the audience. Some nodded in quiet agreement, others whispered to their neighbors. Maria noticed the children sitting near the front, eyes wide and focused on her every word. She realized that in some ways, this was about proving to them that courage and perseverance mattered, that even when faced with authority that tried to belittle or intimidate, one could still stand firm. Judge Preston's eyes flicked toward the audience, then back to Maria, and for the first time, she sensed a flicker of unease in his expression. He leaned forward again, resting his chin on his hand. "Miss Thompson," he said, carefully choosing his words, "it seems that your argument relies heavily on public opinion and emotional appeals. Can you provide concrete legal examples or precedents to support your case? Or will we continue to hear stories that, while charming, are irrelevant to the court?" Maria's heart thumped loudly in her chest, but she refused to let it show. She had anticipated this exact line of questioning and had prepared accordingly. Pulling out a document she had highlighted and annotated, she placed it gently on the desk. "Your Honor, I have gathered multiple cases where similar community institutions were considered in the context of zoning laws. In each instance, the courts considered both the legal framework and the practical impact on the community. I can provide references, testimony, and legal interpretations that support a fair application of the law in this case." She spoke clearly, deliberately, and with conviction, hoping to remind the courtroom that this was not merely about sentimentality, but about reasoned argument backed by facts. Judge Preston's gaze hardened, his lips pressing into a thin line. He seemed annoyed, perhaps because he had expected her to falter or to stumble under the weight of his authority. Instead, she was calm, articulate, and composed, her voice unwavering even as the pressure mounted. "Very well, Miss Thompson," he said, leaning back slightly, "you may proceed with your evidence. But understand this, the court does not tolerate disorganization, misrepresentation, or incompetence. Should any of these occur, I will not hesitate to dismiss your case." His tone was icy, meant to intimidate, and Maria felt a chill, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact, refusing to let him see her fear. She began presenting her documents, one by one, explaining each point with patience and clarity. She spoke about the zoning maps, the community agreements, the letters from local leaders, and the testimonials from families who had benefited from the center. Each word, each piece of evidence, seemed to strengthen her resolve. The audience began to lean in, some whispering quietly to their neighbors about the thoroughness and dedication Maria displayed. Even the children seemed to watch more attentively, as if sensing that something important was unfolding. Judge Preston tapped his gavel, but his interruptions grew fewer as Maria spoke with confidence. He still made small comments, sharp and pointed, but they no longer carried the same weight. Maria realized that the room was changing, that the dynamic was shifting subtly in her favor. She could feel the tension, but instead of fearing it, she began to channel it into determination. Every time the judge tried to interrupt, she paused, looked at him calmly, and continued speaking, demonstrating patience, preparation, and unwavering focus. Time seemed to stretch as she continued her presentation, each point carefully laid out, each argument backed with evidence. The more she spoke, the more the audience seemed to support her silently, their eyes following her every move. Judge Preston's usual aura of control began to crack slightly. Maria could sense the frustration building behind his composed exterior. She also noticed a few subtle nods from members of the jury, small gestures that showed they were absorbing her points and considering them carefully. It was a delicate balance, but Maria understood that the courtroom was more than just law and procedure. It was a stage where confidence, clarity, and moral integrity could make a difference. By the time she finished presenting her main arguments, her voice was steady, her mind sharp, and her heart still pounding, but this time with pride rather than fear. Judge Preston tapped his gavel one last time, his expression unreadable, though a flicker of irritation crossed his face. "Very well, Miss Thompson," he said, his tone colder than before, "we shall continue to review your evidence. You may step aside for now, but understand that the court expects full competence throughout the remainder of this proceeding." Maria nodded respectfully, gathering her documents and carefully placing them in order. As she walked back toward the bench, her thoughts drifted briefly to Buddy, imagining him waiting patiently outside, sensing that something important was happening. The idea of his loyal, comforting presence filled her with warmth, reminding her that she was never truly alone. As the courtroom session paused, the townspeople whispered among themselves, sharing quiet admiration for Maria's composure and courage. Even though Judge Preston had attempted to humiliate her, she had remained calm, confident, and articulate, turning what could have been a moment of embarrassment into a demonstration of determination and moral strength. She took a slow, deep breath, feeling a small, satisfying sense of accomplishment. She knew that the judge would continue to challenge her, but she also knew that she had made her point. She would not be intimidated, she would not be silenced, and she would fight for the community center with every ounce of courage she possessed. And somewhere outside the courtroom, Buddy waited, ready to support her in any way he could, a silent but unwavering reminder that love, loyalty, and determination were more powerful than fear or humiliation. Maria had just finished addressing the judge with as much clarity and calm as she could muster when a sudden commotion came from the courtroom doors. The quiet, tense atmosphere shattered with a few startled gasps and murmurs. Everyone turned their heads to see what was happening, and to Maria's astonishment, Buddy, her loyal golden retriever, had somehow slipped past the security guard and was now bounding energetically down the aisle toward her. His tail wagged furiously, ears perked, and eyes shining with excitement and determination. The audience, including the jury, paused in stunned silence, some even smiling softly at the unexpected visitor. Judge Preston's expression shifted instantly from authority to shock. "What is the meaning of this?" he barked, standing abruptly, his voice echoing through the high-ceilinged room. "Remove that dog immediately." But Buddy, seemingly sensing the tension in Maria's own nerves, did not hesitate. He ran straight to her side, jumping lightly and resting his head against her hand as if to say, "I am here, and I won't let you face this alone." Maria bent down slightly, stroking his soft, golden fur, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief and warmth wash over her. "It's okay, boy," she whispered softly, keeping her voice calm even as she glanced up at the flustered judge. Buddy settled at her feet, sitting proudly and gazing around the courtroom with attentive eyes, as if he were part of the legal proceedings himself. The audience began to murmur appreciatively, some laughing quietly, charmed by the dog's courage and timing. Children in the front row leaned forward, eyes wide, clearly delighted by Buddy's unexpected entrance, and a few of them whispered to their parents about how brave and clever the dog was. Judge Preston's face reddened, his hands gripping the edge of the bench tightly as he tried to maintain his composure. "This is highly irregular," he snapped. "No animal is allowed in the courtroom. This is an official proceeding, not a pet show." His voice trembled slightly, betraying his frustration. Maria, however, felt a quiet surge of confidence. She realized that Buddy's presence, though unconventional, had shifted the energy in the room. The judge's usual aura of intimidation had weakened, and the audience seemed to side, at least in spirit, with her and her steadfast companion. She took a deep breath and addressed the courtroom calmly. "Your Honor, Buddy is my service animal and a constant support in my work and daily life. He does not disrupt the proceedings, and he will remain by my side quietly." She gave Buddy a gentle pat, and he responded with a soft whine of contentment, settling down calmly and looking up at her with unwavering loyalty. The courtroom softened, the audience's reactions shifted from surprise to admiration, sensing the bond between Maria and her dog. Judge Preston, however, was visibly irritated. He tapped his gavel impatiently and muttered under his breath, trying to regain authority, but the unexpected appearance of Buddy had thrown him off balance. Maria decided to use the moment wisely. With Buddy at her side, she continued her presentation, speaking clearly and confidently about the importance of the community center. Each argument she made was now delivered with an added sense of presence and calm assurance, as if Buddy's support had given her the final boost of courage she needed. She spoke about the children who relied on the center for after-school programs, the seniors who counted on it for social gatherings, and the families who depended on its safe and welcoming environment. Her words were measured, deliberate, and infused with the quiet power of someone who truly believed in her cause. Buddy, lying calmly at her feet, occasionally lifted his head and looked around the room, his attentive eyes watching the reactions of the judge and the audience. It was as if he understood the gravity of the situation, offering silent encouragement. The judge attempted to interrupt several times, but his usual authority seemed diminished. He fidgeted in his seat, his interruptions more hesitant, almost as if the unexpected presence of the dog had taken away some of his confidence. The townspeople in the audience whispered among themselves, sharing quiet smiles and nods of approval for Maria's composure and the loyalty of her companion. Even some of the reporters leaned forward, taking note of the unusual yet touching scene unfolding in the courtroom. Maria continued her arguments, now including references to legal precedents, community impact studies, and testimonials from families and local officials. Each point was made with precision and clarity, and with Buddy by her side, she felt an inner calm that allowed her to respond to any comment or challenge the judge made. Every attempt by Judge Preston to belittle or undermine her was met with composed and well-reasoned responses, further highlighting her preparation and dedication. As the hours passed, it became clear to everyone in the room that Maria's case was strong, and that her determination was unwavering. Buddy's quiet presence amplified the sense of integrity and courage radiating from her, making it impossible for the judge to dismiss her arguments lightly. By mid-afternoon, even some of the skeptical members of the jury appeared visibly moved, their expressions softening as they watched the bond between Maria and Buddy, and the way she spoke with honesty and passion. Judge Preston, meanwhile, grew increasingly frustrated, his attempts at control slipping through his fingers. He tapped his gavel harder, tried to interrupt more sharply, but each time Maria met his challenges with calm poise, reinforced by Buddy's silent support. The tension in the room began to shift from apprehension to quiet admiration. People began to recognize that Maria's courage, combined with Buddy's unwavering presence, created an atmosphere of truth, loyalty, and determination that could not be ignored. Even the children in the audience seemed inspired, whispering excitedly to one another about how brave Maria was, and how clever and loyal Buddy seemed to be. As the trial moved toward its conclusion for the day, Maria felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced an intimidating authority figure, resisted the urge to shrink under pressure, and presented her case with clarity, honesty, and passion. Buddy, sensing her emotions, rested his head gently on her foot, providing comfort and strength without any need for words. Judge Preston finally called for a short recess, clearly flustered and struggling to maintain his usual composure. Maria took the opportunity to step back, stroke Buddy's head, and breathe deeply, realizing that this day had already been transformative. Not only had she stood her ground, but she had also shown everyone present that courage, loyalty, and preparation could overcome intimidation, no matter how formidable the challenge. The townspeople whispered in quiet admiration, the jury seemed more thoughtful, and even some of the courtroom staff looked impressed by the calm authority she had displayed. And though Judge Preston had tried to humiliate her, the presence of Buddy had changed the dynamics completely, showing that sometimes, courage was not just about facing a person, but about being supported by loyalty, love, and steadfast companionship. Maria smiled at Buddy, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and relief. She knew that the battle was not over, that the judge would continue to challenge her in the coming sessions, but for the first time that day, she felt empowered, confident, and ready to continue. Buddy's calm, unwavering presence had not only comforted her but had also shifted the energy in the courtroom, reminding everyone that compassion, preparation, and loyalty were forces that could not be ignored. And as she looked around the room, seeing the faces of the townspeople, the children, and even some of the more neutral spectators, Maria realized that this day was about more than just a legal victory. It was about courage, integrity, and the quiet strength that comes from having someone, or something, by your side when you need it most. After the unexpected entrance of Buddy, the courtroom atmosphere had shifted dramatically, and Maria felt a surge of quiet confidence as she prepared to continue her arguments. The townspeople, once tense and anxious, now watched her with admiration and a renewed sense of hope, while Judge Preston fidgeted at his bench, clearly struggling to regain his usual air of control. Maria knew this was a crucial moment. The judge's authority, normally so intimidating, had been softened by the loyalty and courage displayed by Buddy, and she intended to use this opportunity wisely. She began by reinforcing her earlier points, presenting additional evidence with meticulous care, explaining how the community center served as a hub for education, recreation, and emotional support for children, seniors, and families alike. She showed attendance records, photographs of daily activities, letters from parents and local leaders, and even simple drawings made by the children that captured the joy and learning fostered at the center. Every piece of evidence reinforced her message. This was not just a building, but a lifeline for the town, a place where bonds were formed, skills were learned, and hope was nurtured. The jury, who had previously seemed skeptical, now leaned forward with rapt attention, clearly absorbing the depth of Maria's arguments. Judge Preston, meanwhile, grew increasingly impatient, tapping his gavel sharply, attempting to interrupt, and even raising his voice at times. Yet each time he tried, Maria responded calmly and firmly, never losing her composure. She explained the legal precedents that supported her case, citing instances where courts had considered community welfare alongside zoning regulations. Her reasoning was precise, and her voice carried a quiet authority that demanded respect without arrogance. Buddy, lying faithfully at her feet, occasionally lifted his head to glance at the judge or the audience, as if sharing in Maria's mission. His presence added an undeniable warmth to the courtroom, reminding everyone that compassion and loyalty could hold as much weight as facts and figures. The tension grew as the judge attempted to assert his dominance, but the more he tried, the more it became clear to the audience that Maria was unshakable. She maintained eye contact, spoke clearly, and navigated every challenge with careful logic and heartfelt conviction. The children in the courtroom watched her intently, their wide eyes reflecting hope and admiration, while the parents and community members whispered quietly among themselves, visibly moved by her dedication and courage. Even some of the courtroom staff exchanged glances, noting the remarkable way in which Maria had remained composed despite the judge's attempts to belittle her. At one point, Judge Preston slammed his gavel with more force than necessary, causing a small stir in the room. "Miss Thompson," he barked, trying to regain control, "while your stories and emotional appeals are entertaining, they do not replace legal reasoning. I expect clarity, conciseness, and adherence to the law, not a parade of sentimentality." Maria took a deep breath, unfazed, and responded with measured calm. "Your Honor, I fully understand the law and have prepared all necessary legal arguments. However, the law is meant to serve the people, not exist in isolation. The welfare of the community, the safety and education of children, and the support provided to families and seniors are all relevant considerations that must be weighed alongside legal frameworks. My intention is not to replace law with emotion, but to highlight the human impact that the law affects." Her words were precise yet compassionate, and the room seemed to lean in collectively, sensing the sincerity and importance of her perspective. Judge Preston's face tightened, a flash of frustration crossing his features. He seemed to struggle with the realization that his usual tactics, sharp words, condescension, and intimidation were ineffective against Maria's unwavering calm and the quiet, undeniable presence of Buddy. The audience, once tentative, now responded with subtle nods, murmurs of agreement, and soft smiles. Even the jury members, who were trained to consider only facts, seemed influenced by the clarity, dedication, and authenticity of Maria's arguments. The courtroom dynamic had shifted entirely. The judge, who once held the absolute authority, now seemed like a man battling his own ego, while Maria radiated quiet power, integrity, and courage. She continued her presentation, outlining the potential consequences of closing the community center, showing statistics on child development, mental health, and community engagement, all carefully tied to legal reasoning. Her evidence was not just factual but deeply human, illustrating how the law affected the lives of ordinary people. Each point was met with attentive silence, punctuated only by the occasional murmurs of agreement from the audience. Judge Preston attempted one more time to assert control, leaning forward with his gavel raised, his voice sharp and commanding. "Miss Thompson, I will remind you once again that the court will not tolerate irrelevance or theatrics. Stick to the facts." Maria met his gaze calmly, her hands resting gently on the table, and replied, "Your Honor, all of my points are facts. The impact of the law on the community is a fact, the number of children and families affected is a fact, and the role of the center in providing safety and education is a fact. None of this is theatrical, it is reality." Her measured tone left little room for further interruption. Buddy, sensing the gravity of the moment, lifted his head slightly, giving a small, reassuring whine, which seemed to resonate with the audience as a symbol of loyalty, steadfastness, and courage. Judge Preston, visibly flustered and increasingly unable to intimidate, leaned back in his chair, his authority weakened not by law or procedure, but by the unshakable confidence of Maria and the silent support of her faithful companion. Maria pressed on, finishing her evidence with precision, compassion, and unwavering poise, demonstrating not only her knowledge of the law but also her dedication to the people she represented. The audience, now fully engaged, seemed inspired by her resilience, while the jury took careful notes, clearly affected by the thoroughness and sincerity of her presentation. The judge attempted to interject several times, but each interruption was met with calm, reasoned responses that highlighted Maria's preparation and strength. By the end of the session, the energy in the courtroom had transformed completely. What had begun as an intimidating, tense, and potentially humiliating situation for Maria had become a display of courage, integrity, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right. Buddy, lying calmly at her side, seemed to sense that victory was within reach, his presence a constant source of encouragement. As the judge called for a recess, clearly frustrated and struggling to regain control, Maria allowed herself a brief, satisfied smile, stroking Buddy's fur gently. The townspeople whispered to one another, sharing admiration for her strength, resilience, and the remarkable partnership between her and her loyal dog. Children in particular were inspired, seeing that bravery and dedication could overcome even the most intimidating obstacles. Maria understood that the day was far from over and that Judge Preston would continue to challenge her, but for now, she had achieved a small but powerful triumph. She had proven, not only to the judge and the jury but also to herself, that courage combined with preparation, honesty, and loyalty could withstand arrogance and intimidation. And as she looked around the room, taking in the faces of those who had come to witness the trial, Maria felt a deep sense of connection and pride. She knew that with Buddy by her side, she could face whatever challenges remained, confident in the knowledge that love, loyalty, and truth would guide her path, and that the small acts of courage she displayed today were already inspiring the community and creating a sense of justice that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. The final session of the trial began with a charged atmosphere, the courtroom electric with anticipation as Maria Thompson entered, Buddy faithfully by her side, his calm presence a reminder of the courage she carried within. The townspeople were seated, leaning forward in their benches, their eyes fixed on her with silent encouragement, while Judge Richard Preston, though attempting to appear composed, carried an unmistakable tension in his posture. Maria had prepared meticulously for this moment, knowing that the judge's previous attempts to intimidate her had failed and that the outcome would depend on her ability to present her case with clarity, conviction, and unwavering honesty. She approached the bench with measured steps, laying out the documents, photographs, and testimonials that had guided her through the trial, each piece of evidence reinforcing the importance of the community center she had fought so passionately to protect. The children who had attended the center sat near the front, some with their parents, their faces a mixture of hope and awe, while the jury observed intently, taking notes with focused attention. Maria began by summarizing the key points she had presented in previous sessions, emphasizing not only the legal validity of her arguments but also the real-life consequences of closing the center. She spoke of the children who relied on after-school programs for learning and safety, the elderly who found companionship and support, and the families who depended on the community services that had been offered consistently for years. Her voice, steady and resolute, carried across the courtroom, reaching every corner, and the sincerity of her words resonated deeply with those listening. Buddy, lying quietly at her feet, occasionally lifted his head to glance at the judge or the audience, his attentive gaze a silent but powerful reinforcement of her dedication and emotional integrity. Judge Preston attempted, as usual, to interject, tapping his gavel sharply and reminding her to stick to the facts, but Maria responded with calm precision, demonstrating that every point she made was firmly grounded in evidence and legal precedent. She referenced specific cases where courts had considered the broader impact of zoning laws, and she illustrated how similar institutions had been protected in other towns due to their significant role in fostering education, safety, and community well-being. With each argument, the energy in the courtroom shifted further in her favor. The audience, once apprehensive, now leaned in with quiet admiration, their expressions reflecting pride in Maria's courage and determination. The children whispered excitedly to one another, inspired by the idea that standing up for what is right could make a difference, and the parents exchanged nods of respect, recognizing the depth of Maria's preparation and the strength of her character. Even the jury, who were trained to remain impartial, seemed moved by the clarity and authenticity of her presentation, and the tension in the room, once dominated by Judge Preston's attempts at control, had noticeably softened. The judge's attempts at authority were increasingly futile, his interruptions grew hesitant, his voice carried a hint of frustration, and the stern composure he normally exuded was clearly cracking under the weight of Maria's unwavering confidence and the quiet power of Buddy's supportive presence. Maria continued, systematically presenting every aspect of her case, highlighting the social, educational, and emotional benefits of the community center, while connecting each point to the legal framework that governed the zoning dispute. Her arguments were clear, concise, and compelling, demonstrating not only her knowledge of the law but also her profound understanding of the human lives affected by the court's decision. Buddy, sensing the gravity of the moment, remained calm and steadfast, occasionally lifting his head and letting out a soft, reassuring whine that seemed to echo the empathy and loyalty Maria embodied. The townspeople whispered among themselves, sharing quiet smiles and approving glances, as the narrative unfolded in a way that was both powerful and heartwarming. The judge, visibly unsettled, attempted a final series of interruptions, but each time Maria met him with a calm, authoritative response, demonstrating patience, knowledge, and integrity. She had anticipated every challenge, every attempt to belittle her, and responded with measured clarity, ensuring that her message remained focused and compelling. As the session drew to a close, Maria concluded her presentation with a heartfelt statement, emphasizing that the community center was not just a building but a lifeline for the people of the town. She spoke directly to the jury and the audience, her voice carrying a quiet, unwavering strength, that justice, fairness, and compassion were as essential to the law as rules and regulations, and that the well-being of the community must be considered alongside legal precedent. Buddy, sensing the finality of the moment, rose slightly on his paws, giving her a brief nudge of encouragement that brought a small, proud smile to her face. The courtroom was silent for a few moments, everyone absorbing the weight and sincerity of her words, before Judge Preston finally tapped his gavel, signaling the end of the proceedings. The jury deliberated, and the audience waited with bated breath. When the decision was announced, Maria's heart soared, the verdict was in her favor, and the community center was saved. Applause erupted through the courtroom as relief, joy, and pride filled the air. The children clapped excitedly, parents hugged one another, and Buddy barked happily, tail wagging furiously, as if celebrating alongside everyone. Maria knelt to hug her loyal companion, whispering softly, "We did it, Buddy. We really did it." The townspeople cheered, not only for the victory itself but for the demonstration of courage, determination, and loyalty that had made it possible. In the days that followed, Judge Preston faced scrutiny from the judicial board due to his conduct during the trial. Reports of his attempts to humiliate Maria and his inability to maintain professional composure circulated widely, and within a few weeks, he was forced to step down from his position. The town celebrated not only the preservation of their cherished community center but also the lesson that integrity, preparation, and courage, combined with loyalty and support, could overcome arrogance and intimidation. Maria and Buddy became symbols of hope, resilience, and the quiet power of standing up for what is right. Parents told their children about the bravery they had witnessed, neighbors praised Maria for her unwavering dedication, and the children, inspired by her example, learned the importance of courage and perseverance. Maria herself felt a profound sense of accomplishment, knowing that she had faced immense pressure, intimidation, and challenge, and had emerged not only victorious but with her dignity, integrity, and confidence intact. She realized that the trial had been about more than just legal arguments, it had been about demonstrating the strength of character, the value of loyalty, and the impact of standing firm for what is just. Buddy, ever faithful, remained by her side, a quiet but powerful reminder that love and companionship could provide the strength to overcome any obstacle. Together, they had not only saved the community center but had also inspired a town to believe in the power of courage, honesty, and determination. And as Maria looked around at the smiling faces of the townspeople, the joyous children, and the relieved parents, she understood that this day would be remembered for years to come as a triumph of integrity, courage, and the unbreakable bond between a woman and her loyal dog, who had reminded everyone that even in the face of intimidation, truth and dedication could prevail, and that sometimes, the quietest supporters could have the loudest impact. The courtroom, once a place of tension and fear, had become a stage for justice, compassion, and community spirit, and Maria knew that the journey she had undertaken was as important as the victory itself, a lesson she would carry with her forever.